Sports Radio.
Here comes the siren. I want to go higher. Oh, my goodness. He's going to drive. Deep left field. No doubt about it. Coaching will defend. Oh! LeBron James with no regard for human life.
Pass is intercepted at the goal line by Malcolm Butler. Unreal.
Oh, baby, for sure.
Cabin Sports Radio starts now.
Cabin Sports Radio is on the Cabin Radio airwaves. Unbreakable Mike Gibbons and Lecter with you for another hour of sports chat brought to you by Sport North, moving sport forward. A very exciting weekend in the world of sports, specifically the NFL. Of course, Wildcard weekend happened, and something that nobody was putting money that they actually expected to be a decent return on investment happen. Nobody predicted that. The Browns.
The Browns.
Oh, my God.
They're going, not to the dance, but they're on their way to the dance, and they will appear in this coming weekend.
At this point in Cleveland
Divisional
Browns
round.
history, I would just call that the dance.
Yeah. See, you would place a bet because the odds would be so long.
That's true.
You're not,
Yeah. But you wouldn't expect
to get that back. You would look at those odds and go, oh, yeah, I'm going to put some coin down.
Yeah.
Not fully expecting it to come back, but you'd be a little enticed by how long those odds probably were.
Right.
Especially facing a team like the Steelers heading in. They pulled it off.
You would probably would have put a more sure bet on the U.S. Capitol building being stormed.
Probably,
and like broken windows and whatnot. That would have been a better bet than the Cleveland Browns making it out of Wildcard weekend.
Yeah.
But, so I guess if you bet on both of those, then you're rolling in it.
There you go.
All right, lots to talk about as well. The NHL season is set to kick off this week. I still can't believe it's happening, but that as well. So we'll talk about that. The quiz coming up later in the show as well. But let's get it started with your CSR headlines.
The NFL playoff picture is set following Wild Card weekend. In the AFC, the defending champion Chiefs will play the Browns in one divisional game, and the second-seeded Bills will take on the Ravens in the other. In the NFC, the top-ranked Packers will face the Rams, and Tom Brady and the Buccaneers will travel to New Orleans to play the Saints.
Some pretty interesting matchups in the next round here. So the Chiefs playing the Browns. Now, obviously, the Cleveland Browns winning anything was massive, huge, almost unprecedented news by this point.
It was a really good weekend. Probably the most football I've watched in some time now. Wild Card weekend is usually when I start to tune in a little bit more over the course of the regular season. Maybe if it's a marquee matchup, I'll make sure to watch. But as soon as Wild Card weekend hits, that's when it starts to get a little bit more real and just becomes even more exciting, I think, when the playoff picture is set in full and we know what the bracket is from here on out all the way to the Super Bowl, the presentation of the Vince Lombardi Trophy. But that was the marquee game for me anyways. So they got off to a 28-0 lead.
Yeah.
It's the most points, I think, since 1969. So that's pre-merger, I think. The most points in a first quarter for any team. And they were on the road, too. Not that it made that much of a difference without spectators, but they had to go to Steel City to get the win. And got off to a really, really good start. The Steelers had me believing in a bit of a comeback. They gave the Browns gave some back. I think went into the break up 35-10. And the Steelers got to as close as 35-23.
Yeah.
A dozen. And we're sort of hanging around there. But Roethlisberger, 4 picks, 4 touchdown passes. He threw for 500 yards. So,
well, you pretty much had to.
Yeah.
Down 28-0 at the half. It's time to just start winging balls.
But completion rate not that good in the 60s. And when you throw 4 picks in a playoff game, you're not really giving your team much of a chance. So That's the story. I think that game was probably the marquee game from the weekend. And I think, like you said, because no one expected it.
No, not a chance anyone predicted that.
Right.
Like, you might have just, like you said, the odds would have been just, and not even that the Cleveland Browns were a bad team. They were an 11-5 team.
Right.
You know, it's not like they came in 8-8 to just barely, I mean, they kind of did barely sneak into the playoffs, but that just shows you how good the AFC is this year. But it's not like they limped in like the Pittsburgh Steelers actually did, ending off their season at 1-5.
Yep.
That was probably the one thing that you had to think was in the Cleveland Browns' favor. Because really, playing on the road in Pittsburgh, a place, divisional rival who they just have not fared well against historically, missing several personnel and staff, their head coach among them due to COVID-19 protocol. He wasn't even allowed to communicate with the team, virtually or otherwise. He had to stay home, wasn't able to be there. So that's another thing you got going against you. And then you're the Cleveland Browns. Just history. It just works against you. They had everything working against them. And the fact that you have all of that, and you come out 28-0 out of the first half. Mm-hmm. And then you kind of had to be thinking, well, if any team is going to blow this in an epic proportion, it's the Cleveland Browns. So even then, I don't know that they necessarily had any factors on their side. I don't know if a 28-0 lead is enough to make Cleveland Browns fans feel comfortable in that game.
I think Chris Collingsworth said it on the broadcast at one point. You can't describe something like momentum, but you can always feel it.
Yes.
And there was a point about midway through the third and really into the latter part of the third and even into the early part of the fourth where even myself, a pretty casual viewer, started believing in Pittsburgh. They got it to within a dozen, and then that's a 2-score game,
right?
Because they're going to try to go for the second point for the conversion, and it's not something that you can explain, but when you're watching a game, you know that it's happening. And it felt like the field had tilted a little bit, and it was very much in favor of the Steelers. They were marching down the field. They had some good sequences in a row for scoring drives, and it felt like things were coming unraveled a little bit for the Browns. Everything that was working in the first half, suddenly not so much in the second. But it was always an untimely turnover for the Steelers that kind of sealed their fate, and that was the story late in the fourth, even when they were still within striking distance, but never got closer than a dozen, I don't think. And that was really all she wrote. So hard to believe that was a team that got off to 11-0 to start the season, right? But I think most people looking back now will say that those numbers were probably a little bit inflated, not indicative of how good they really were, and really, really stumbled towards the end of the season. Cleveland, to their credit, like most Cleveland sports teams, counted out from the start. And they obviously had the really unfortunate injury to Odell Beckham Jr. At the start of the season, so things weren't looking good, and that was sort of the storyline after the game. And they said, we've been counted out all year long.
Right.
We believe that we belong here, and we showed it tonight. Baker Mayfield, a pretty average game, not nearly as much yardage as Roethlisberger, but a little more clinical. Didn't make as many mistakes.
Right.
And again, if you're throwing 4 picks in a postseason game, you're not really giving your team much of a chance to win. So the biggest storyline, I think, out of Wildcard weekend was the Cleveland Browns getting their first playoff win in 26 years. I think you have to go all the way back to 1994.
Yeah.
When we were just youngins. For a sports city that, just has not had good luck. They had a funny stat, post-merger success of the two franchises, and Pittsburgh has been one of the more storied franchises and more successful franchises in recent memory anyways. And Cleveland as a whole, you look at all their professional sports teams outside of that Cavaliers win in 2016, you had to go back 50 years, I think, for any major title.
Before records were kept, really.
Probably, yeah. I mean, the Cleveland now baseball team came very close. I think at Game 7 in the World Series a few years back and wasn't able to seal the deal. So Cleveland probably feeling pretty good today.
There were fireworks going off, literally after the game in Cleveland, in downtown Cleveland.
Yeah.
And again, this is just the opening round of the NFL playoffs. If that doesn't tell you the story, I don't know what will. And it's just, like you said, there was still that little seed of doubt as the fourth quarter set in that. Could they blow this? And that's the seed of doubt that comes from the fact that you've got a quarterback who is playing his first playoff game. As good a season as Baker Mayfield had, you're playing against a guy like Ben Roethlisberger, who has been, I think, like other than Tom Brady, he's got to be the longest serving quarterback in the league now. Has played countless playoff games, and aside from that, just big regular season games that feel like playoff games. He's been in these situations before. Now, coming back from a 28-0 deficit is arguably insurmountable for any quarterback, regardless of how many times you have been in pressure situations. But just that, and that is something that I'm sure Baker Mayfield and any young quarterback has to learn, is when you are in those moments when you have a game sealed, you got to make sure that you put the final nails in the coffin. And that is what leads me to believe that I don't really think the Browns have a chance against the Kansas City Chiefs. Yeah,
now, so what does that get them? The win against the Steelers. They get a matchup now with I would assume, the Vince Lombardi favorites in the defending champion Kansas City Chiefs, the number one.
Yeah, at the very least, the defending champions.
Yeah, the number one ranked team in the AFC, probably most people's picks to win it all. So in very, very tough for their first divisional round appearance in 26 years. So this may be where the story ends for the Cleveland Browns, but I'm sure they're just happy to be there. I can only I think the city of Cleveland might explode if they beat the Kansas City Chiefs. They won't even have made it to the Super Bowl, and that the city will just be dust. Yeah. So a really good story out of Cleveland. The other AFC game, a team you have in the Super Bowl at the start of the season. Yeah, not at the start of the season. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. It wasn't that good of a prediction. Just, by the tail end of the regular season. You were feeling it?
I was feeling it. I mean, the Baltimore Ravens, they got everything you need to be a championship team. Why not? Why not the Baltimore Ravens? One thing that, it's kind of it's amazing how bad the Cleveland Browns have been, but we haven't even talked about the Buffalo Bills yet.
No. Number 2 ranked team in the AFC.
Unbelievable. And now they are headed to that divisional round matchup against the Baltimore Ravens. Kind of the same boat. Cleveland Browns fans have, and one thing I learned, I was going to mention this earlier, I learned through looking on social media that just how many Cleveland Browns fans there are out there that you just never heard from.
Right.
You'd hear them talk about football, but you never actually heard them say who their favorite team was because it was too embarrassing for the most part.
You're not going to say Cleveland.
They win a big
Cleveland
game.
Browns.
And all of a sudden, look at all the Cleveland Browns fans rising from the ashes. And, and I don't see that with the Buffalo Bills. Their fans, they've always been present. They've always been miserable. But they've always been present. They don't hide the fact that they're Buffalo Bills fans. And it kind of got to a point where, almost the same as the Toronto Maple Leafs fans, although the Toronto Maple Leafs always have high hopes. Buffalo Bills fans, for years, have not had high hopes.
Right.
They've just been like, this is our team, this is our cross to bear in life, and that's the way it is, unfortunately. But very exciting. The Bills and the Browns in the divisional round.
It's pretty crazy.
I would be blown away if that has ever happened before.
So I'm from Southern Ontario, so I've got a lot of Buffalo Bills fan friends.
Right.
Anytime that we ever heard the team Buffalo Bills in the media, it was because there was always rumors that they would be relocated to a city like Toronto, for instance. Will the NFL, like the NBA and the NHL, ever expand north of the border? If so, that'd be a very natural pairing. The Blue Jays have played games in Buffalo this past year. So there's always been sort of ties between the two cities, very close to one another geographically. So that was, whenever I heard the Bills, it was in that context. It was if they are to relocate, they're going to come to Toronto. And there'd always be games at Rogers Place, so that was always pretty exciting.
So what was the reaction from your Bills fans?
Well, they're absolutely ecstatic now, of course, because of course they're going off to the divisional round, have a chance to go to the AFC title game, and finished second in the conference all season long. So a good season from Josh Allen. It's not something I don't think either of us were expecting at the start of the season, to see the Buffalo Bills and the Cleveland Brown both with a chance to advance to a title game and then potentially go on to play for a Super Bowl. It's really unfathomable.
Pretty unbelievable,
I would say.
Yeah. In the NFC, of course, you mentioned the Packers and the Rams. I don't want to say that I picked the Packers to make it to the Super Bowl.
Yep.
I'm hoping they can make it past the Rams. I'm an Aaron Rodgers fan.
Yeah,
I think
totally.
a lot of people are.
Definitely.
Like, you'd kind of be, whatever about the Packers, but Aaron Rodgers plays there.
Yeah.
So,
and that postseason success has really eluded him for an otherwise
since his Super Bowl victory,
stalwart career, right? Surprised that he wouldn't have more Vince Lombardis, but they obviously look as strong as ever in the NFC, getting the first spot. Who do you like in the other one?
Tom Brady versus Drew Brees.
Yeah.
That's you gotta love that.
Yes.
That's a classic matchup there. I don't know. I feel like I want to give the edge to Drew Brees.
Yeah.
Just because it's, although, the Buccaneers finished, I think, with an 11-5 record as well. I think, very good season.
Yep.
There is still that kind of element where you have Tom Brady not with Bill Belichick now in like a pretty meaningful football. Is there something that doesn't quite make a connection when it needs to? You don't know. But Drew Brees has been with the New Orleans Saints. He's been their leader for as long as most of us can remember by this point. So I feel like maybe there's something there that when it gets to like a big moment, all of a sudden, Brees will have that play in his back pocket,
right? And
maybe Brady won't.
Yeah, it feels weird and kind of hard going against someone like Tom Brady in a postseason game. But I mean, if we're looking at the regular season stats, it wasn't close. Sweeping the season series 2-0, and both really convincing wins for the New Orleans Saints over the Buccaneers. I would give an edge to the Saints as well to come out and a pretty highlight match against the Packers if they're able to come out and those two duke it out for the NFC. Not that I'm offering a prediction, but I feel like that might come to pass.
Okay. All right. We're not going to mark it down because we don't like to remark on our awful predictions on this show.
No. Let's move on to the NHL. The 2020 season will officially kick off Wednesday and will feature a pair of all-Canadian matchups in the brand new North Division, which includes all 7 clubs north of the border. First, the Toronto Maple Leafs play host to the Montreal Canadiens before the Canucks take on the Oilers in Edmonton. All 7 teams have been approved to host NHL games in their home arenas this season.
So there we go.
It
is happening.
Yeah.
Already some reports this weekend, though, of possible COVID-19 exposures. A couple like training camps shut down.
Yes.
So I mean, the adversity begins already with regards to the NHL season getting underway, and hopefully, being able to continue uninhibited, at least for the most part, by and large, with the ongoing pesky little pandemic that's happening. But nevertheless, it should be interesting to see. I was talking with Jay Bear a little bit earlier today, and he I don't know, did you watch any of the blue and white game? I saw
highlights of them.
Yeah. He said Freddie Anderson did not look good.
Okay.
So that's a little scary to start things off. But I mean, we've talked about this before on the show. Freddie Anderson, a traditionally slow starter.
That's right. Yep.
And coming up a little bit later on the show, as we mentioned, we are going to do another edition of the Cabin Sports Radio Quiz. And today, it is taking a look back at the 2013 opening day rosters, which was the last time the NHL opened its books, its season in January, and comparing rosters. How many players are still left? Spoiler alert.
Yeah. Did you just give me one of them?
There's not many for any of them.
I thought you might have just given me one with, with Frederick Anderson.
No, Freddie Anderson, a member of the Anaheim Ducks.
Okay, yeah.
That season.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that should be fun. But it'll be interesting though. Looking ahead, while I was comparing rosters from this season and 2013, I had a look down some full rosters for this year coming in, and there's a few like off-season moves that I completely forgot about. And all of a sudden, I was looking at the Ottawa Senators roster, and it's like, you know what? I don't think they're going to be as bad as we think they are. I think they might surprise some people. So
I was gonna, throw out the idea of offering up some predictions for which I think will be a really fun division. Yeah. I think the North Division has a lot of potential to be really fun. And to their credit, we've always been a little unfair to the since this show started, but just because luck hasn't really been on their side outside of the Senators' deep playoff run in 2017. The Senators and the Canadiens have usually not fared too well in recent years.
Not in our existence.
Nope. No. Not in the regular season anyways. The Canadiens, I guess, making it past the Penguins in the play-in round last year. But outside of that, some pretty tough goes for both those clubs. But you're right. There is a reason, I think, for a sense of optimism in the nation's capital. They've got some good young players, and certainly some that will crack the roster soon. Mm-hmm.
And they added some pieces that I think is going to make them tough to play against. They've still got that young core that they're starting to develop. Like, they've only taken a step forward, you would think. I mean, we'll find out when they actually hit the ice. But they added some good veteran pieces.
Yeah.
Nothing groundbreaking that necessarily jumps off the page at you or anything like that. But they've added some pieces for sure. And I at the very least, they're not going to be, a free space on the bingo card this year. And the Montreal Canadiens, I was looking down their roster too. Mm-hmm. They're going to be a good team,
right?
I don't think we were giving them enough credit for the moves they made after. But then when you look down the roster and you kind of start to add them up, it's like this is a potentially really competitive team.
Yeah.
The one that I had really forgotten about was Tyler Toffoli.
Right.
I forgot they had signed him.
That's right. Yeah.
Of course, he joined the Vancouver Canucks for their short playoff run last year, but signed with the Montreal Canadiens in the offseason. And honestly, if he can continue with what he showed in his stint in Vancouver, that could be a good pickup for the Habs.
Yeah.
And they made some other moves too. I think the Leafs definitely, they've been getting, and this could just be a symptom of the Toronto media being the Toronto media,
right?
But they've been getting a lot of preseason love.
100%.
They're gonna run away with the North Division, no question. They better not sleep on any of these teams to start the season.
No, they won't be easy to play against. A really good, promising core in Ottawa. Shabbat, Dadonov, who could be primed for a breakout year. He's going to be getting some top-line minutes. Brady Tkachuk, not easy to play against whatsoever. No. Let's see if Stützle cracks the roster.
I hope so.
They are going to be very talented, but also not easy to play against.
Yeah.
The Canadiens, too, don't have to rely quite as heavily. Oh, not to mention the addition of Matt Murray. What could he bring to the Ottawa Senators?
Yep.
With Craig Anderson signing a PTO elsewhere. In Montreal, they solidified their goaltending situation by bringing in Jake Allen. Mm-hmm. Of course, you've got arguably the best goalie in all of hockey in Carey Price, but now you can afford, in what's going to be, a condensed season, we're going to see some back-to-backs. Now you can turn to a really reliable backup goaltender in Jake Allen. Another healthy season out of Shea Weber, you hope. Brendan Gallagher. So neither team, I don't think, is going to be very easy to play against. And, if any team's guilty of sort of sleeping on teams or, maybe taking a night or two off based on who they're playing against, it's their divisional rival in the Toronto Maple Leafs. So not two teams that you want to sleep on, I don't think. And the same can be said out west. I think there's that added incentive of every game's going to be a marquee game now. You're going to be playing against either a conference rival or an all-Canadian rival. So that will get people riled up a little bit more. I think we should see some really good hockey. I don't really expect any team to absolutely run away with it. I think really all will, for the most part, be in contention. Maybe towards the end of the regular season, a team tapers off a little bit, but I don't really see anyone running away with it, and I don't see teams falling too far behind. I think it should be some really fun competitive hockey. We're going to get 10 battles of Alberta. So that could get pretty hairy. And obviously the Canucks have formed some rivalries with their Alberta counterparts as well. So and then who could forget the Winnipeg Jets? So I think it's going to be a really, really fun season.
Yeah, me too.
And
looking forward to it.
Some of the best talent is in the North Division. So I still think the East, the Eastern Conference, featuring mostly metropolitan teams.
Oh, they haven't sold it yet. It's not the Pepsi division yet. Or?
Yeah, I forget actually.
I know they were talking about it.
I think they did it. They did it. Yeah. So one of them's Honda. Oh, well, I think that's sweet. West. I can't recall immediately, but all of them do have sponsored names now.
Okay, yeah.
So it's going to be a really fun year, I think. And I agree entirely. I wouldn't write off some of those lesser teams, if you will. I think they'll be in the running just as much as some of the other teams.
Looking forward to it. So, Wednesday it kicks off, and yes, we have NHL hockey in our lives once again.
That's right. One other tidbit. You see, Mike Babcock has found employment.
Oh, I didn't see that.
Yes.
No.
Not as a coach. Replacing Mike Milbury on NHL on NBC.
Okay.
So we will see more of Babs on some American hockey telecasts.
Mr. Personality.
There you go.
Put him on TV.
There you go.
All right.
Replacing Mr. Milbury. So 3 days away from hockey, which is going to be really nice.
Love it.
All right, fine. We'll wrap up with some NBA news. The National Basketball Association has postponed another 2 games after one of last night's games was pushed back. Tonight's scheduled game between the Mavericks and Pelicans and tomorrow's game between the Celtics and Bulls have been postponed in accordance with the league's new health and safety protocols. This comes after last night's game between the Celtics and Heat was postponed after a number of Boston players returned positive COVID-19 tests.
On one hand, at least they are very on top of it. There is immediate response to any positive tests that are coming through. Obviously, it sucks that games are having to be shifted around and rescheduled and whatnot, but good on the NBA for continuing to be diligent. And you knew this would be tougher this year too, because there is no bubble. Not everyone's not just confined to Disney World. It's just kind of, I think, falls in line with what were probably fairly predictable challenges coming into this season.
Yeah, there was a funny graphic last week when the Sixers game wasn't postponed. I can't remember who they played. I want to say the Pacers, but I can't recall exactly. Elected not to postpone their game, even though they had 7 or 8 active players. I think they have to have 8.
Okay, well, that's not so great.
If you have 8 players in accordance with that is okay, as per the NBA's health and safety protocols. That's like which would be, a great number for, an open run here. That's kind of like the magic number because you can get a lot of playing time. You're not running that hard. It's all out of shape guys anyways. But, for an NBA game, you don't want fewer than 8 players.
Right.
So they had Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons among 5 or so other players who all, as per the rules, had to quarantine for a period of time because they may have come into contact with someone with COVID-19. I couldn't even tell you 4 of their 5 starters, names I had never heard in my entire life. The one who did play was Danny Green, I think, and he had a horrible game.
Danny.
So it gives new guys a chance, and one of their rookies set a career high, I think, with 39 points. But the graphic really told the story. It was like that is what this pandemic is doing to this sport.
Right.
Now that they're not going the route of having a defined bubble, teams are still traveling, obviously not playing in front of spectators, but going from one city to another night after night.
Yeah.
And it's taken its toll a little bit, and we're seeing that with more positive tests and players having to self-quarantine as a result. So the next night, that's when the Celtics had Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, another 5 or 6 players who weren't available for their game against the Heat. So that was postponed. And now news today that tonight's game between the Mavs and the Pelicans is postponed. Tomorrow's game, because of those previous positive tests on the Celtics, tomorrow's game between the Celtics and Bulls also postponed. So there's a little bit of nervousness, I think. Some of that being quelled by reports coming out saying that, at least to this point, the discussion has not been had about shutting her down or, going the route of a bubble again. But you don't want this pattern of postponing games to continue. Mm-hmm. And certainly it's not the most positive trend right now where we're seeing numerous, you look at the timeline or you look at, featured stories on NBA.com. It's just a list of who's not available per the league's health and safety protocols. So hopefully, we can tighten those up a little bit. It sounds like the league is humming and hawing about changing some of its protocols, maybe tightening things up anymore as a way to limit exposure. But not something you want to see going forward. No, for sure. And it's amazing thinking about how much things have changed in the last 10 months with regards to COVID-19 cases, where everything was shut down in March 2020 because, there were the first instances of cases, and they didn't want even to entertain the idea of playing basketball when there was one case, amongst the league's players. Now it's just kind of like, well, it's 5. That's not so bad. The tone has shifted so much. Like it's shifted about as much as my tone has in just this general conversation we've had right now. Where suddenly I'm like, well, that's not so good actually. But it's still, I guess this is kind of predictable, right? Like I don't know. It would have been naive, I guess, to expect any differently when you are not doing a bubble situation and you're in the United States, which is still just rife with COVID-19. I don't know. That's an interesting conversation. When does it become too much? Right. I don't know where that line is anymore. No. And by the time they got into the bubble ahead of resuming the playoffs at the end of last summer, once everything was established in the bubble, there were no cases after that point. There were a couple near misses, and we remember some funny stories of guys being kicked out of the bubble for doing things they weren't supposed to be doing, right? Like going to strip clubs when you're supposed to be playing playoff basketball with your teammates. That's not a good idea. So you get kicked out of the bubble for stuff like that. But when you're not in a bubble situation and you're traveling from city to city, the Raptors, for instance, played in San Francisco last night. They've got a game in Portland tonight. So their West Coast road trip has seen them go all up the west coast of the United States, and obviously no cross-border travel because they're not playing their home games in Toronto right now. They're based in Tampa. But from east to west, north to south, they're all over the United States on any given week. Traveling, and some of these spots are COVID hotspots right now. We know that. So we might see these numbers continue, but you don't want to get in a case where, week after week, you're continually postponing games, because then it's going to beg the question, when do we shut her down, or when do we go the route of a bubble? Because right now it's not working, but hopefully things get tightened up a little bit. Maybe we see some new protocols and we see fewer postponements going forward. And finally, as opposed to shutting it down, when do the Raptors get started, Mike? 2-7. Another loss to the shorthanded Golden State Warriors last night to drop to 2-7. Had a pretty good look at the end of the game on a shot from Siakam that didn't drop. They are still very much figuring things out. So even the rotation to this point, there was, of course, a game a couple weeks ago where Siakam was benched. He's found his form a little bit more since then, but the depth scoring hasn't really been there too much. They don't really have their de facto go-to guy per se, and have had some pretty tough matchups so far. Maybe it's not having a sense of home right now, just because they are based remotely in Tampa and don't have their home cooking and, get a chance to actually stay in the city of Toronto because there's no cross-border travel right now.
Yeah.
But, they've got to figure things out pretty quickly. The Atlantic Division is as competitive as it's been in a while. We're talking about the Cleveland Browns earlier. The New York Knicks are suddenly kind of good again, which is really weird. The Nets, you figure, will figure things out with a healthy Durant and Irving. The Celtics are blossoming with Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. And then the 76ers are the best team in the East right now. So if they're going to figure things out, they're going to have to do it pretty quickly because they're suddenly in a very competitive division and a competitive conference. And, you don't want to be in a lower seed going into the playoffs. So hopefully they can turn things around. If not, you're going to hear a lot of trade rumors.
And that probably is something that we aren't really giving enough consideration to, the fact that they don't have a home court.
Right.
Obviously it was one thing when nobody had a home court in the bubble situation, and there was no advantage or disadvantage there. But the Raptors, even though there's no live crowds, and that's, traditionally the biggest thing with home court advantage.
Oh, yeah.
You have the crowd that's on your side. You can kind of gain some energy from what they're putting out there. But you still have just the comforts of home, the old familiar, your locker room. You've got your stuff where you want it rather than where it fits when you're on the road. There's probably quite a bit to that. They're probably still trying to get used to the fact that they're just going to be traveling the whole season. Like, that is, regardless of anything else, that's a major disadvantage. So something that, despite getting kind of behind the eight ball right off the bat, they are going to have to overcome, and hopefully can figure out sooner than later. But, with Nick Nurse guiding the ship, that's a pretty good chance that they figure that out and get over that hump, hopefully sooner than later. But we've got a quiz coming up, Mike.
Oh, boy.
So let's take a break and come back with a little Cabin Sports Radio quiz next.
The Cabin Sports Radio Podcast, brought to you by Sport North, moving sport forward.
Cabin Sports Radio is brought to you by Sport North, moving sport forward. You can check them out online at sportnorth.com, and I might implore you to check out sportnorth.com/kidsport. Kidsport NWT, much like Kidsport Canada, the NWT chapter of Kidsport believes that no kid should be left on the sidelines and all should be given the opportunity to experience the positive benefits of organized sports. Kidsport provides support to children in order to remove financial barriers that prevent them from playing organized sports. Check them out and make a donation if you so choose at sportnorth.com/kidsports. All right, it is time for another edition of the Cabin Sports Radio Quiz. As we mentioned earlier in the show, this is the latest that an NHL season has started since the last NHL lockout, which was in 2013. The regular season kicked off on January 19th, 2013. This one happening just a little bit earlier, getting in just under that wire. But 7 years ago, yes, the last time an NHL season started in January. And as we know, Michael, 7 years can be an eternity in a sport like hockey.
Oh, yeah.
And unsurprisingly, there aren't many familiar names left from those 2013 teams today. So I thought with our quiz, we would go down the now Northern Division. What's the branded version of it?
I'll find that out. I actually I can't remember off the top of my head.
The Ford Division.
Yeah.
The Chevrolet Division. Something else Northern.
Yeah.
Probably Rogers. Let's be honest.
Yeah, actually, that's probably a safe bet.
All right, let's just call it the Rogers Division.
I'm just saying North Division right now.
The Bell Division.
Sorry, the Scotia North Division.
That makes sense.
That does make sense.
Why would we not think of Scotia?
Yeah.
Okay. The Scotia North Division will be comprised of the Montreal Canadiens, the Ottawa Senators, the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Winnipeg Jets, the Calgary Flames, the Edmonton Oilers, and the Vancouver Canucks. We are going to go through team by team, and you are going to tell me how many players are left from those teams' respective 2013 rosters.
Wow.
We will start in the East with the Montreal Canadiens. Michael, one is pretty obvious, I think. But How many players are left in total today from that 2013 Montreal Canadiens opening day roster? Is it A, 1, B, 2, or C, 3?
Wow. As soon as I saw this, I knew that I would struggle immensely. And full disclosure, I did ask pre-quiz if it would be cheating if I pulled up depth charts of each club's current roster. And even still, it's difficult because, like you said, that's a long period of time going back to 2013.
Yeah.
You said one of them's pretty obvious, so I'm going to say Carey Price.
Carey Price.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Now,
is he the only one?
So I'm going to say there are two.
Okay.
And you're not able to tell me if that's correct.
Nah, you're correct.
Okay.
You are correct.
But I need to name the second.
For bonus points.
Yeah, okay.
Who is the other?
Is there a chance, and maybe I'll ask this question first because maybe it applies to other rosters too. Can someone leave a roster and come back?
I don't see why not.
Okay. So if they're on that, we don't really care what they're doing in between. But if they were on it now, and they were on it then, it would appear on this list. I'm going to take a shot in the dark here, and say Thomas Tatar.
No, because he would have been a member of the Detroit Red Wings, I think, in 2013. No, the second player. Do you have another guess?
Ooh.
I think I assume it would have been his rookie
defenseman?
season. No, forward.
Okay. Rookie season.
And by this point, if it wasn't for Shea Weber, he would probably be team captain.
Okay.
Real heart and soul.
Yeah, the first name that comes to mind, but I didn't know how long ago he was drafted, would be Brendan Gallagher.
Okay. Bingo.
So I would have thought that he would have been drafted after 2013. Right. So was that his first season? Or
I think it was.
It must have been pretty close.
It must have been either his rookie or his sophomore year. But there you go. 1 for 1. They have 2 players left from that 2013 roster. Okay, next, the Ottawa Senators.
Okay.
Do they have A, no players from the 2013 roster, B, 2 players, or C, 3 players?
Ooh. I kind of want to say 0.
0. You are absolutely correct.
Wow. Okay.
They are 1 season removed from having 2 players still left from that 2013 roster, which would have been Craig Anderson,
right?
Just signed with the Washington Capitals.
Yep.
And the other one was, and now I'm trying to blank off the top of my head.
Who did they lose in the offseason?
Mark Borowicki.
Right, of course. Yep, okay.
Who I think signed with the Nashville Predators.
Yes, he did. He did, yeah.
Really wish the Leafs had signed him, but nevertheless, here we are.
It's crazy talking about the Senators. When we were talking about the fire sale that was had in the nation's capital 3 years ago, they're only 3 years removed from going all the way, almost within 1 game of going to the Stanley Cup final before losing to the Penguins. Who went on to win that year against the Sharks.
I think
against the Sharks, in 2017.
16, and somewhere around there.
The talent they had on that team, it's crazy.
Yeah.
And now really nothing to show for it. But like we said earlier, a nice, promising young team in its place. So they should be good for some years to come.
Yeah, might show up there again in the near future. Who knows? The Toronto Maple Leafs have A, 0 players from the 2013 roster, B, 1 player remaining, or C, 2 players remaining.
Oh, my goodness. Now, you did say previously in the show there was 1, I believe. But, actually, sorry, you didn't say the number, but we know that it's not Frederik Andersen. He was still playing for the Ducks at that time.
Yes.
So 2013, I think most Leafs fans would remember that year. That was the fated Boston Bruins comeback.
Big old collapse.
Oh, yeah. Up 4-1 in the third period with 10 minutes to go and collapse. Now, so if we go back a couple years, of course, I remember Nazem Kadri being on that team. Joffrey Lupul on that team. Was Phil Kessel still? He was still, of course. Yeah. So
this was the age of truculence, you remember, of course. So Colton Orr, of course, was a part of that team as well.
So the current core of, I believe Austin Matthews was drafted in 2016, first overall pick.
Sounds right. Yep.
Yeah, because did McDavid go the year before in 2015 as the first overall pick? So that core of Mitch Marner, obviously Tavares wasn't there, Matthews wasn't there, and Nylander wasn't there.
Right.
So if there was a single player and maybe there aren't any, but if I were to guess that there was one, I'm tempted to say Morgan Riley because I can't remember when he was drafted.
And he was drafted the previous June.
Okay.
But was not on the opening roster that season. I think he spent one more year in junior.
Okay.
And so the answer is A, 0.
It's 0. Okay.
No Maple
All
Leafs
right.
left from that 2013 collapse, and probably all the better for it.
Yeah.
To be honest.
I remember that year all too well.
We move on to the Winnipeg Jets. And you may recall this was the inaugural season.
Oh, my goodness,
Winnipeg Jets 2.0. Winnipeg fans had to wait an additional 3 months to finally see their brand new team take the ice against the Montreal Canadiens in opening night. That opening night Jets roster featured some such names as former Leafs Nick Antropov and Alexei Ponikarovsky.
Wow.
The rest, some pretty unremarkable names, but the question, how many Jets remain from that opening night roster? Is it A, 1, B, 2, or C, 3?
Wow.
Now, 1 should be pretty obvious once again.
Blake Wheeler?
Blake Wheeler.
Okay.
Captain of the Winnipeg Jets. He was definitely there. Who are the other players or player?
Okay. I want to guess 2.
Okay.
So there are 2 total?
You want to go with B?
I'm going to go with B2. Yeah.
Okay. Technically, you are correct.
Okay.
Now, I wasn't quite sure how to break this down or how to justify this, but Mark Scheifele was on the opening night roster.
Okay.
That was his rookie season, but it wasn't officially his rookie season because he only played the first 7 games.
Right.
And then they sent him back down to junior.
Okay.
So technically, Mark Scheifele was on that opening night roster.
All right.
If you had asked for the 8th game of the season roster, he wouldn't have been.
He's not
there.
on it. So there is another, though. So technically 3?
And so technically, Brian Little is still technically a member of the Winnipeg Jets, but is on long-term injury.
Right.
Depending on what site you look, he may or may not actually show up on the roster. I think he's collecting a paycheck.
Okay.
I don't actually
know. I meant to ask this question, too, because of the LTIR placements. And, there's some guys that are still getting paid money by their previous teams.
Yeah. So Brian Little might never actually play another game with the Winnipeg Jets. We don't really know at this point. But he was on that opening night roster.
Gotcha.
And as far as I know, he hasn't retired.
Okay.
So there you go. The Winnipeg Jets, 3 with an asterisk, we'll say. All right, on to the Calgary Flames. The 2013 roster. How many are left? Is it A, 0, B, 1, or C, 2? Ooh. Now, again, 1 is probably fairly obvious.
Would it be their captain?
It would be their captain.
Mark Giordano.
The Hammer himself.
Okay.
Yes.
So I was gonna say Giordano.
So that rules out A.
Okay. So A is.
So is it B1 or C2? And the fact that I said 1 should be fairly obvious probably gave it away that there is another one.
There is another one.
There is another one.
So it's going to be C2? There are
C2,
2 of them. Okay,
yes.
excellent.
Can you name the other player on that roster? Still on that roster,
Still on that roster. Would it be, so it's not going to be a goaltender.
No, not a goaltender. The 2013 roster actually featured Mika Kiprusoff.
Right, of course.
I think in his last season with the Flames.
Okay.
Maybe, yeah.
I want to say... I'm looking at their forward corps here. I'm assuming this would have been before Gaudreau was drafted.
It might not have been before he was drafted, but it was before he played his first NHL game. And this is actually 1 year removed from the answer being 3 because TJ Brody was on that 2013 Flames roster.
Now a member of the Maple Leafs.
Maple Leafs, yes.
Okay.
So who is the other
Mikhail
one?
Backlund.
Bingo.
We're okay.
Yeah,
okay.
nice one.
All right, I'm looking down this roster going, these guys... This is a new generation of Flames players right here.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, and if you look at that 2013 roster, like a very, very veteran roster for the Calgary Flames.
So when did Iggy leave When did he leave the Flames?
So that might have actually been his last year.
Yeah, okay.
With the Calgary Flames.
Before going to Boston?
Yeah, and Colorado.
Yeah, he had a couple
I can't remember
stops.
exactly what order those happened, but they don't matter. His post-Flames career, I don't know if we really...
Well, and apparently no one else remembers him either, because
That's right,
he's being interviewed for weather forecast and people don't know who he is.
That's right. NHL Hall of Famer, no big deal.
Retirement's been good to him. He can slip into anonymity.
All right, up to the Edmonton Oilers. We have 2 left. And, Michael, the question once again, the Edmonton Oilers, how many are left from the 2013 opening day roster? Is it A1, B2, or C3?
Oh, see, I don't like this because I can't default to 0.
Now, you already ruled out McDavid. He was drafted in 2015. So Leon Draisaitl would have been either the year before or the same year. I'm not sure.
So, right, yeah. So it's not going to be Larson, because he was, of course, part of the Taylor Hall trade, so he would have been in New Jersey.
Yep.
I'm just trying to remember, because they had the string of all those first-round picks in a row. So would Nuge, would he have been on the roster then?
The Nuge was on the roster.
Because him, Hall, Eberle, and McDavid... Between the three of them were first overall picks. I think the only one who wasn't was Eberle. Yeah, okay. Okay, so Nuge is one of them. Oh, boy. Would not have been James Neal. He was playing elsewhere.
No. And really, if you look down, man, actually, that Oilers roster, I think, is the most indicative of how much has changed since 2013.
Yeah.
There's some names on there where you're just like, what?
Okay.
Who was that guy?
Yeah. So, okay, the only other one I'm sort of wondering about is Chris Russell.
Chris Russell. No.
Okay. So was it just the one then? Was it just the Nuge?
Just the one.
Okay.
Just the Nuge.
Yeah, I'm looking up and down this roster. There's a lot of new faces.
Yeah. Yeah, there you go. Ryan
even this
Nugent-Hopkins.
year. Yeah. Okay.
The final survivor of that run of first-round picks before.
I remember him having a pretty electric rookie season. He came out of the gates pretty hot.
Yeah. And now as well, rounded himself into a pretty good two-way forward.
Definitely.
So really no surprise in the end that he is the one player that has survived the cleaning of house in Edmonton.
His former teammate Taylor Hall gets a new chance in Buffalo this year to play alongside probably the best player he's ever played with in Jack Eichel. So maybe he'll redefine himself a little bit. Eberle is still in the island.
Yeah.
Doing...
He wasn't,
not as well for himself.
Well, I mean, he was not far from a potential Stanley Cup final opportunity.
Yep.
So I think he's happy there.
Yeah.
He's doing all right. And finally, we end with the Vancouver Canucks. Michael, how many players were left from that 2013 roster? Was it A, 0, B, 1, or C, 2?
Oh, boy.
And this is a roster that, of course, featured the Sedin twins.
Yep.
Alex Burrows.
Yep.
Who else was on that roster? Roberto Luongo.
Of course. Yep.
And that might have been his last year as a Vancouver Canuck.
Yeah.
That would have been 2 years after their Cup final.
Yes, when they lost to Boston in 7.
And he might have been run out of town shortly thereafter.
Yeah. Went on to play with the Panthers immediately afterwards.
Yeah.
Still maintains one of the best Twitter accounts in all of professional sports. Strombone.
Yeah.
Fun fact about Alex Burrows. I guess he's just an incredible, this shouldn't surprise you, street hockey player.
Okay.
I don't know if that's how he was founded per se, but that was word on the street anyways, that this guy was just an incredible street hockey player.
Right.
So maybe those are his roots. Anyways, looking at this roster, I'm tempted to say 1.
Okay. 1 is absolutely correct.
Okay.
Now, can you name who the player was?
My goodness. All right, so it's obviously not going to be a goaltender. Looking at the depth chart for the defenseman, no one is really jumping out. So I'm thinking if it's a forward. And the only name that is kind of jumping out to me, and I can't tell you why, is Jay Beagle.
Jay Beagle. No, he would have been a member of the Washington Capitals I believe, at that time. No, the one player remaining from the 2013 roster is Alex Edler.
Okay.
Yeah. A young pup at that time. Now one of their veteran defensemen.
That's right.
And, man, one of the most consistent, I think, defensemen in the league over the last, what would that have been? 8 years, 7 years by now. And, there you have it. Pretty good showing.
All right, not bad. Okay.
Didn't give yourself enough credit. Okay. You worked it out. I gave you a few, in hindsight, pretty obvious clues.
Yeah.
So, there you go. But that's kind of how we do it on the quiz. We are very nice to each other. And we help each other out. That's right. Yeah. It's about education, not about competition.
That's right. Yeah.
I wish our betting worked the same way.
I know.
Well, we continue to learn, even if it is the hard way. We are going to finish things off here on Cabin Sports Radio, as you mentioned right off the top of the show, and probably won't stop thinking about for the rest of the day. The Cleveland Browns beating the Pittsburgh Steelers 48-37. Definitely the biggest story of the weekend for so many more reasons than just the Browns winning anything. Their first franchise playoff victory in 25 years. Tim Couch was still in high school the last time the Browns won a playoff game. Needless to say, fans were pretty pumped. Going so far as to greet the team's flight back into Cleveland at 3 a.m. We'll let them bask in that for now. And until next week on Cabin Sports Radio.
Even tweeting out congrats to the team on the playoff win, but also warning that celebrating with gunfire is illegal. So we were getting reports of some people setting off fireworks in downtown last night, though.